Hello and welcome to Wander and Words. My name is Jamin and I like to make videos about books, traveling, and language learning. In today's video, I will be sharing with you the best classes I've taken as an English major. I am now in my 4th and final year of university, so I've taken quite a few classes, 40 to be exact, and I thought that I would take some time to reflect on them in case you are an English major or if you're interested in becoming one. Just keep in mind that not every university is going to have the exact same course offerings. However, I wanted to hopefully give you a better idea of what to expect and maybe convince you to take some similar classes as well. Let's get started. Class number 1, short fiction. I wanted to begin with this one because it was nothing short of amazing. It not only helped me to improve my skills as a writer, but it also gave me the opportunity to see what studying a master's degree in creative writing would be like. That is because this class was open to both undergraduate and graduate students, meaning we were together and we got to converse and ask each other questions. Of course, I had a lot more questions for them because my goal is to study a master's degree in the near future. My fingers are crossed. I was very nervous, and let me tell you, imposter syndrome was alive and real. On day 1, when we gathered together virtually over Zoom, everyone was introducing themselves and they were saying things like, I've been published 3 times, I'm being mentored by this author, I have 30 years of writing experience. And when it was my turn, I was like, hey, I'm Jamin. I like to write for fun. So I actually have published something before. Back when I was in high school, I got a little short story published in a literary magazine, but that felt so trivial to mention and I was just really nervous and I felt like I didn't deserve to be there. However, I knew deep down that I did. I know this is going to get so cheesy, but that was because I actually had to fill out an application form to even get accepted into this class. Now, it's not normally like that. I've never had to do that for any other class, but for this one in particular, I needed to fill out an application form answering questions such as why did I want to participate, what is my experience with publishing, and I also needed to hand in 2 writing samples. So I'm not normally someone who likes to share my work. It makes me super nervous because it puts me in a vulnerable position, and I'm sure that many of you can relate, especially those of you who also enjoy writing. When we write stories, it's like we're putting ourselves into it. It's like a self-portrait, if you will. So when someone doesn't like it, it's like, oh my gosh, you don't like me. However, I know that's not actually the case. Receiving constructive criticism is actually one of the best things you can do as an aspiring writer, and that's something that I learned in this short fiction class. So I actually talked all about constructive criticism in my reasons why you should major in English video, but I will just briefly say here that it is crucial to know how to help people and how others can help you. So when we workshopped, which is what we did for the last 2/3 of this course, we would each take turns reading each other's works. So I was in group 4, meaning that no one read my short story until the 4th week of the workshop session. I started off by reading my classmates' works in groups 1, 2, and 3, of course, and at first I was really bad at it. I wasn't able to really help anyone because my comments simply sucked. I would say things like, great story, that part made me laugh, or that character was funny. And I was so nervous to say anything that seemed remotely negative because I didn't want to hurt that person's feelings. However, saying where an author or writer can improve, such as by telling them to maybe expand on that part, maybe reword that sentence, maybe explain a little bit more clearly the reason as to why a character did something, like their intrinsic or maybe extrinsic motivation for something. That is not negative. In fact, it's actually so helpful. So giving constructive criticism, especially in an environment like a workshop where feedback is of course encouraged, it's very, very helpful. And by the time group 2 came along, I realized that I needed to spend more time crafting better comments. So to do that, I really analyzed each person's stories, and on a Word document, I would kind of insert my comments and also where they could maybe have some constructive feedback. And of course, keep in mind, I was much less experienced than my peers, but everyone still valued what I had to say, and they were so appreciative, just like what I had felt when it was my turn for people to comment and workshop my story. So the professor himself treated all of us fairly. He is actually a published author, and at the time I wasn't aware of that. Like when I first registered for the course, I didn't realize that he was kind of such a big deal in the literary world, at least here in Saskatchewan. And a few years ago, one of his stories was a national bestseller, so that was pretty cool. Anyway, when it was group 4's turn, so my turn, I sent out my story and I had to wait a few days. So on Wednesday we would workshop together, and when your story is the one being discussed, you're actually not allowed to say anything. So you just have to listen, remain emotionless. Hearing what people had to say in that anticipation building up to it, I was like sweating. I was like, they're not going to like my story. They're going to say that it sucks. It doesn't make sense. And lo and behold, I did receive a few comments that kind of helped me to improve my story, because I had a few concerns about why my character was so motivated to steal money from the company that she worked at. So the plot that I decided to focus on was one that I just sort of created one day. I was playing around with some different ideas, brainstorming, and I thought about writing a story with an unlikable character, and I've never done that before. I usually, unintentionally, try to create characters who have similarities to me, like, of course, maybe that could be unlikable to some people, but this character was just downright unlikable in every way imaginable. She was selfish, conceited, things like that, and she also was a thief. So I only had around 2,000 words to develop this plot, and that's not a lot of really room to do something like that. I was kind of ambitious, but I'm really glad I did it, because I ended up receiving a lot of criticism, but not in a bad way, like constructive criticism. And I just got to sit there and kind of hear where people's concerns laid, and it was so helpful. And after that first workshop, the first workshop that was actually about my own story, I felt so inspired. It actually made me want to write even more. So right after the class ended, I opened up my Word document and started to fix those spots, and we always had the opportunity to edit our story one time before handing them off to the professor, where he would then grade us. So because of all of that valuable feedback, I was able to get a really good grade in this course. And we also wrote another short story after everyone had completed their workshop date. So overall, we wrote 2 stories that had a minimum of 1,500 words and maximum 3,000, and we also completed various prompts at the beginning of the course. So, did I convince you to take a creative writing class? I hope so, because even if you don't have any actual experience, don't worry, you're going to learn so much. A lot of the discussions are about things that you don't typically discuss in other English classes. For example, my second story was about a young boy who visits the ocean for the first time. And if you've ever watched any of my videos, you probably know that I am a huge fan of Mexico. I talk about that country a lot, and I really love Spanish. So I incorporated a few Spanish words into my short story, and that sparked a lot of discussion from my peers. We started to talk about when it's okay to add words from other languages, when it's okay to create new words and mash them together. And it was just so fascinating, because a lot of people had different opinions, and that's not really the case with a lot of English classes where you do have to follow such a rigid structure when essay writing. You don't really have a ton of flexibility. So overall, taking a creative writing class is extremely unique, and I only wish that I could have taken more. So not only will you get to improve your skills, but you will also get to workshop and have some polished pieces to add to your writing portfolio. Now on to class number 2. That is none other than the Victorian literature class that I took over a year ago. So I have mentioned it a few times already, such as in my Everything an English Major Reads video, and that is because it is such a remarkable class in my opinion. I loved it, and I almost never took it at all, which would have been a shame. So the story of how I signed up for Victorian literature is actually kind of silly. I had woken up one day really early. It was like 5 a.m. and I was teaching, and then instead of going back to bed afterwards like I normally do, I decided to stay up and peruse through Netflix. I came across Bridgerton, which had just recently been released at the time. Naturally, I became rather obsessed with the show, and I did start to research and learn a bit more about the Regency time period, even though the show is far from being historically accurate. The winter term at my university was about to begin within a few days, so I was really inspired, and I looked at the course offerings in search of a Regency literature class, and nothing really came up except for a Victorian literature class, which seemed similar enough to me, so I registered for it, and a few days later it started. We read different novels, including this one, which I've talked about quite a bit, even in the annotating video that I made a few weeks back. So it is none other than North and South, which follows Margaret Hale after she moves to the big city, and she starts to shed away her naivety, is that a word? Her naiveness? I can't even think. So she starts off very naive, and throughout the course of the novel, she meets various characters who help her to grow and learn about the world, and she also starts to immerse herself in the town. So she makes friends with different people of different social classes, and of course, she also finds a guy. I was rather surprised by how romantic a lot of these novels were. So maybe that was just my professor. Maybe she's just a fan of romance novels, I don't know, but Far From the Madding Crowd is another one that we were assigned to read, and it's just a huge love triangle. Anyway, we read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, The Woman in White, so a lot of really interesting novels were on the syllabus, and I loved every single one. That doesn't normally happen. More often than not, there's at least one story or text, whatever it may be, that I just absolutely hate per class. Like, it's just part of being a university student. You're going to do a lot of assignments that you don't enjoy, read a lot of things that you just despise, but for the most part, I do love what I read. It's just not everything is going to be great. Except for this class, it was all amazing. And I have to say, the professor was on the strict side in terms of grading. I didn't actually get like the best grade in this class, even though it is one of my favorites that I've ever taken. So we were assigned to write 2 essays. One of them needed to have some research in it with different serials. So that's like a little publication. So North and South was originally published as a serial, which is like 1 chapter per week in this book full of other stories. And we had to like read about different magazines during that time period, see what themes were popping up, and then base our essay around that. So that's what I did. I didn't do great, but it's fine. And then essay number 2 was kind of one of our choosing. So I talked about Bathsheba and how she defies a lot of standards that were set out for women in the Victorian time period. And as a final grade, we had the most interesting assignment ever. So I love assignments where we're allowed to be really creative, and this is a perfect example of where that actually happened, which is super rare because normally it's just essay, 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 especially when you study online. Like, most of my degree actually took place virtually. The assignment was a commonplace book, and if you've never heard of it, it's totally fine. I never heard of it until this class either. It's essentially a notebook where you write down your thoughts as you're reading the book. You can do chapter summaries, talk about parts you liked, and just sort of make notes as you go. It's like a journal about your books. So we were told that we needed to keep a commonplace book, and we also needed to present it to her at the end of the class as a final grade. We also had like a final exam, but this was just like part of that grade. So I wanted to do something a little bit different. Instead of just making a nice pretty notebook, I also decided to turn it into a video, and the professor really seemed to like the video, and it helped to boost my grades. So yeah, it was a really cool assignment, and I wish more professors had students doing commonplace books. I also really enjoyed how we had a historical component where we learned about the different situations that led up to people reading for fun, for hobbies. So people were able to read a little bit more because they had windows in their houses, which meant that they could get more natural light and actually see the pages, and the cost of publications were going down thanks to serials, which it's just a huge background there. I would highly recommend taking a Victorian literature class if you get the opportunity. The third and final class that I am going to be talking about is actually not an English class at all. So I have a minor in Spanish, meaning I needed to take a certain number of classes in Spanish in order for it to be recognized on my official diploma. However, this area of study isn't as extensive as my major, so it's not as though I have perfect Spanish skills or anything. It's just something that I have always really been interested in and wanted to pursue a little bit further compared to some other electives that I've taken. And with this minor, it meant that I was able to study abroad in the beautiful city of Guadalajara, Mexico. It is the second or third biggest in the country, and I got to live there for 3 months, actually right before the whole situation got crazy with the world. That was when my program ended, so I flew right back home during that really crazy week. Anyway, the months leading up to that were awesome. I got to live with a host family and explore the city. So yes, the focus on this part of the video will be on the Mexican history class that I took in January of 2020. I had a super cool professor who was named Mercedes. Anyway, instead of sitting down in a class and learning about history, she asked me if I would be interested in actually exploring the city, and of course I was like, heck yeah. She was amazing because instead of making me feel nervous about my level of Spanish, which was B1 at the time, she really encouraged me and helped me to use the language and talk about more complex situations and topics such as history. I mean, talking about history can be difficult in our own native languages, let alone in another language, so she was always very encouraging, always gave me corrections in a really kind and helpful way. So on day one, we visited a museum. She told me about its history as promised, and I had my little notebook, and I was also able to document our little excursions. So there were 2 other students with us. They were actually in another level, but they were taking a Mexican history class as well, so we kind of joined forces, and it was really cool. They were from the same university as me, so it was so nice having some other people, and we got to explore together, take lots of pictures, and we visited other places besides museums, such as houses owned by really important people, schools like the one that Guillermo del Toro owns. He is a really famous Mexican director, a film director. Like, how often do you really get to explore the city with a local, improve your language skills, and have it count towards your degree? Not too often. Knowing another language, or at least understanding the basics of how grammar works, is really going to be beneficial to you as an English major. Thank you so much for watching this video. I know that it was kind of a chilled, laid-back style where I just sort of chatted about these different classes, but I hope that you enjoyed and you were able to get something out of it. So to wrap it up, I will just say, yes, you should totally take a language class, a Victorian literature class, and a creative writing one, but at the end of the day, it's all up to you. Talk to your guidance counselor and figure out which ones will be good for your degree. So overall, good luck with your studies. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Thank you so much for watching.